Welcome to Then and Now, a podcast by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. We study change in order to make change, linking knowledge of the past to the quest for a better future. Every other week, we examine the most pressing issues of the day through a historical lens, helping us understand what happened then and what that means for us now.
Hello, I'm David Myers, host of Then and Now. On March 6, I sat down for a conversation in front of a live audience at the Wende Museum in Culver City. My partner in conversation was the founding director of the Wende Museum, Dr. Justin Jampol. We were there to mark the public launch of the new Meyer and Rini Luskin Public History Program at the Wende. We talked about history and how and why it must be a tool to help us navigate the challenges of the present. Have a listen to my conversation with Dr. Justin Jampol.
Wende Museum is built on conceptually, practically, in imagination and in dreams on the idea of transformation or change. It's a word that was used to describe the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. And this question about what comes next, what possibilities are there, and the impact of history on so many lives. Tonight is a personal and professional Wende for me, and I'm so glad we're here to experience it together. So a quarter of a century ago, I graduated from UCLA. Go Bruins. And it was an earth-shattering experience for me in so many ways. It's when I fell in love with the power of history, both in terms of understanding a very complicated world and also giving us the tools to try to sense what it is like for other people, to teach skills, to teach the gift of empathy. And in this day and age, we need it more than ever. And I'm so grateful to have learned at the feet of so many who are here with me. Teo Ruiz, who was my professor at UCLA, David Myers, who is going to be speaking with tonight, Ron Malor. It's amazing to me that these are people who are not only with me at a critical point in my life, but stayed with me all along the way. And the fact that all of you are here tonight really means a great deal to me. How amazing. It's another aspect of history that compels me, has moved me for the last 22 years since the museum started, which is the ability to bring people together and to build community. We're in a community center right now. And so when I decided that history was going to be a part of my professional life forever, and little did I know what it would end up as, this crazy and absurd idea for starting a museum, I went to the one place that I knew that I felt safe and inspired. I went to Bunch Hall. For those of you who don't know, it is a waffle-shaped building on the campus of UCLA where all my historians and friends were, including Peter Baldwin, whose door I knocked on at 23 years old after getting back for a quick break from Oxford. And I said, look, I've got these collections. I know where they are. I don't know what to do with them. And Peter at the time thought it was perfectly reasonable to acquire, protect, preserve, and then share these endangered collections. And he was connected to a foundation called Arcadia, and then we were off to the races. How amazing. Then about 10 years ago, Peter invited me to a dinner at his home with two other people that would become very important to me, Meyer and Rini Luskin. It's a memory I'll never forget for a very specific reason. At a time when history and humanities in general were overlooked and undersupported, they were committed. And not only that, they went all the way. Their commitment is what supported and underpinned so many of us in the history department. It inspired us to extend our our work to go deeper, to research more, to be a part of this community of history. And in a time when the sciences and engineering, and we like them too, but this for us is really what drives us and animates us. They were our cheerleaders, our champions, and they were and are our patron saints of history. I tell them that all the time, but it's true, our patron saints of history. And I have to tell this quick story because they're involved in every step along the way. They're philanthropists who roll up their sleeves and get involved. And I saw it firsthand. David allowed me to be the third wheel. By the way, I call myself, when people ask me what I do, I'm like, I'm a professional +1. I will jump in on any time I can with great people. And the most amazing thing was, and we were there together, this was only a few weeks ago, all these people were coming out of the woodwork from the kitchen to pay their respects, to say hello. And I counted 15 people. I'm like, he's figured it out. And it made me so proud to be associated with somebody who cares so deeply about one another. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what history really is. It's our interest and our curiosity in trying to understand other people. And here's this guy that was in the boxing team and wrestling team at UCLA, who was interested in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, among other things. And Rini, who graduated from UCLA too in sociology, and committed her life and your life to helping others through your social work. That's a pretty amazing combination, and that is really amazing. So when Meyer and I were talking about this rapidly changing world we're living in, how we can have anchors, reference points, how we can understand the world in a better way, and to have the critical skill sets to analyze, to understand, to sift through all of this bombardment of information, Meyer encouraged me to reach back out to David, and I jumped right in. The Luskin Center for History and Policy is such a beacon for all of us, and it does such great work. And you've been such an extraordinary leader, friend, and advisor, and as well as my co-conspirator in planning this event tonight. I've learned so much from you back then and still do now. And Meyer, you challenge us to come together to create a new dynamic partnership that would underpin a year-long series that would emanate, that would be a catalyst for us to have real conversations about where we are in the world and how history can help us understand it. And I think that's the magic, not only of the Wende, but the magic of history and of community. So tonight is a perfect example of that. Look around the room, all different walks of life, ages, backgrounds, because we all have so much at stake, all of us. And as I heard so much recently, in the past few months especially, when there's so much hardship, challenges in the world, never has the past felt so relevant, and embedded in that also the answers and the solutions for making a better world for all of us. And as far as policymakers go, I'm thrilled to have here our state assemblyman of the 55th District, Isaac Bryan, who I'm going to call up in 1 minute. Because I want to end on this anecdote. I think it brings it all around here, I hope. So Isaac has become an important champion of the Wende. And for this very building we're standing in right now, when we broke ground on this, Isaac was there. For the topping out event, Isaac was there. When we needed support to help create our new housing initiative for at-risk artists and scholars, Isaac was there. So we got to spend some time together, and I cherish our friendship. I text him sometimes about what's going on. And after he secured a grant for us from the state of California, thank you, Isaac, we were talking about Wende moments in our lives, the moments of transformation that changed it all for us. And for Isaac, it was when he got a scholarship to UCLA, where he received a master's in public policy from, drumroll, the Luskin School of Public Affairs. Yes. And now Isaac is here, changing the world for the better. Not only are you preserving history, Meyer, Rini, but you're helping make it. And that is amazing. So congratulations and thank you, our patron saints of history, Meyer and Rini Luskin. And I'm going to ask Isaac Bryant to come up to do a short presentation.
Thank you all for coming out in the rain. This is an important night. There's a lot of good things happening here, and I don't know about you all, but I could use some spaces where some good things are happening. Thank you, Justin, and the Wende for being who you are in this community. My district goes all the way up to both sides of Wilshire, so I have LACMA and the Academy Museum and others. This is my favorite museum. It's not even close. It is not even close, and it is because of the storytelling power that Justin puts in to every exhibition. I don't know how many of you came recently when they had the surveillance exhibition. How powerful, is it still up? How powerful is that right now? Right? You talk about the need for a historical analysis during a polycrisis to realize we've been some of these places before, right? And it's the purposeful actions of erasing that history that make us forget that we know what to do. We know what we've seen. We know a Nazi salute when we see one, right? That's the power of history. A lot of folks don't know this, but I actually came out under a historian at UCLA, Kelly Lytle Hernandez, a Culver City resident. She's my mentor and friend, and I was studying under her and working under her at the Ralph Bunche Center at UCLA directly before I went into office. And she was giving me a historical lesson every day on how we became the incarceration capital of the world, right here in California, and how we turned the largest mental health provider in the state into our county jail. And that informed the way I thought about problems and the way that I still do. But that's just one of the many lessons that history can teach us about where we've been and how we got to where we are. Those lessons can't be remembered and can't be told, though, if you don't have people like Meyer and Rini and so many of you who are willing to step up to preserve that history, to expand that history, to invest in new scholars and scholarships and fellowships, and to bridge the academy and the university. The most frustrating thing for me as a student was I felt like what we did in that ivory tower in Westwood was so disconnected from the everyday life that I lived, or my 12 siblings lived. I thought we were so far away and we were so privileged, and it was beautiful to study there. But how does that relate to the real world? The Wende is in the real world. This is one of those bridges, and it's an important bridge. And so I want to thank you, Meyer and Rini, and everybody who's helped make this happen. And I also want to tell a short story about these two and how important they've been to me. When I was coming to graduate school, no one in my family had been to graduate school. That is a foreign concept. You were more likely to be unhoused or incarcerated than end up at UCLA and graduated school. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for college. And the University of Arizona gave me a full ride to go to Tucson. That was where my undergrad was. So stay in Tucson. We'll pay for it. We'll give you health insurance. You can stay here. And I really wanted to come home. And I really wanted to go to UCLA because I'd been dreaming about it since I was 9 years old. And it just couldn't happen. And then I got a call from, at the time, Chair Peterson, who said, you know what? You're going to be one of our Luskin Fellowship recipients. And we've got $15,000 for you. And that made all the difference in me going to UCLA. And then I tell you, after I graduated from UCLA and I got to work, got to organizing, got to making a difference any way that I could, I eventually started the campaign to run for office back in 2021. And my fundraisers would just give me long sheets of people who could give money, might give money. You should call them anyway. And there was a Doreen Luskin. And so I called her because I thought she might be related to Rini and Meyer. And I called her, and this very sweet woman answered the phone. And I told her who I was, and I said, the Luskins meant a lot to me in graduate school, and I couldn't be there. And do you know Rini and Meyer? And she said, I am Rini. And they stepped up for me in that way too. I wouldn't be your assembly member if it wasn't for that education, if it wasn't for that helping hand, and if it wasn't for that continuous support. And that's just the difference that these two have made in my life. The difference that you're making in the community today and with this fellowship, it means the world. And it's my honor to be here. And I haven't, one of my favorite things as an elected official is I can make resolutions for anything. If you need a certificate, call me and I got you. But one that I hadn't made yet that I was really looking forward to making tonight is a certificate for the two of you on the start of this fellowship. And it would be my honor to present it to you tonight.
I didn't prepare anything to say to you, although I was told that I could say a few words. So I thought I'd do it all extemporaneous and let it come out, whatever comes out. But you all didn't come here to listen to me. You came here to listen to these wonderful people. So those are the people that I want to tell you how much I admire you all. These wonderful people from the UCLA History Department. These were all former chairs of the department. And Rini and I had the delightful experience of getting to know all of them, Theo and Ron and David, all chairs. The fantastic experience of seeing this wonderful Isaac do what he's done on what an amazing person. And then finally, Justin, who I love, who I think is fantastic. And I'm here to say what Rini and I have done. It's okay, but it's nothing that special. But I think is really special, Justin's what you're doing. To have I guess I can only think of this Yiddish word called chutzpah. To have the huevos. I mean, which one of you would have said, I'm going to start a museum, I'm going to build a museum? I mean, you would think you'd be out of your mind if you said that, to start and create. And look what he's done over the years. It's simply amazing and fantastic. And I haven't got the words to tell you how much I admire and love and think it's amazing what you're doing with your wonderful wife, your two beautiful kids. And so I thank you, Isaac, I thank you for what you're doing. My history guru is over here, I thank you. And so my best and love to all of you.
Now with that, we are going to get David Myers up here. And David, while you take a seat, and if you could... Yep. We're going to get on to the program. We talked a big game about how history can help us understand the world we're living in right now, but now we have to figure out between David and I'm just going to repeat whatever he says because I know it's going to be smart. We're going to come up with some answers here, and when we solve the world's issues, you're going to remember where it happened right here at the Wende Museum. So it is my distinct honor to be joined here by Professor David Myers, a renowned historian whose scholarship has helped shape our understanding of Jewish history, the role of memory in creating identity, and the broader ways in which history intersects with contemporary issues. As a professor at UCLA, where he holds the Sadie and Ludwig Kahn Chair in Jewish History, David's work not only examines the past, but also explores how historical perspectives can help us navigate the complexities of the present. So tonight's conversation will take the form of a 45-minute dialogue introducing some key themes about the different ways historians can approach the present moment. We will explore how historical thinking, its methods, its frameworks, and perspectives can offer crucial insights into today's world, from political shifts to global conflicts and to cultural transformation. So with that, please join me in welcoming Professor David Myers. There you go. David, why don't you kick things off by sharing some thoughts about how you think history can be, what are the frameworks we can use for history to help us understand this world, this crazy world we're living in?
Well, I'd be delighted to do that, but I first want to say thanks to you, Justin, for having me, to all of you for making your way out on a rainy night. And I just want to say a couple, just if you permit me, two prefatory remarks. One, beginning with Isaac. I don't think I've ever told you this, Isaac. I first met you, you may not remember, when I had invited your mentor and our beloved and brilliant colleague, Kelly Lytle Hernandez, to come speak to a group of history department supporters. And at the last minute, Kelly said, "I'm sorry, something came up at the Bunch Center and I can't make it. I'm going to send my close associate, Isaac." And I must confess I was crushingly disappointed, to be perfectly honest. As well as should be. Kelly's brilliant and scintillating and thought-provoking, and it wasn't going to be the same. And indeed it wasn't. In walked Isaac Bryan, who then was a master's student at the Luskin Center, at Luskin School for Public Affairs, and proceeded to blow everybody away with his staggering command of, this was his work on the $1 Million Hoods project that Kelly directed under the rubric of the Bunch Center, which indeed takes up the question, as Isaac said, of the staggering rate of incarceration in Los Angeles County, especially amongst people of color. And Isaac, this master's student, just had a remarkable command of data, as we heard, incredible conceptual grasp of the larger problem, and was just transformative for the group that was assembled, which had low expectations, truth be told. But I and many others saw something there that I have seen on subsequent occasions, because I'm not just an admirer of Isaac's, I'm a constituent of Isaac's. And I've actually seen him as a retail politician in a setting to which he returns repeatedly, a synagogue which I belong to. And I just have to say there are very few people who possess that remarkable gift of engagement with constituents, together with the kind of conceptual sophistication that you have. You are, in that regard, really the ideal public servant. We are incredibly in your debt for committing yourself to serve the commonweal, and we're going to support you. I say this, without any formal connection to this institution, so that we not endanger its 501c3 status. But I am going to support you till my dying day, because you are really the paradigm of what it means to be a public servant. I want to just thank you and acknowledge you for that. And I share Myers' marvel at this creation ex nihilo, which owes to the unique institutional genius of Justin. And I don't know how, I agree, Myers, I don't know how you could do this. I mean, you can create a field of study if you're, a path-breaking scholar. To create an institution of this degree of uniqueness is really, almost unimaginable. I know, however, that it takes partners like you, and I just want to also finally acknowledge you, partners in so much of the work that I've been able to do at UCLA, and so many other people, dozens of people at UCLA could say the same thing. What is, I think, especially important for me to convey tonight is you have not only been remarkable partners in building institutions of significance, You have become the closest of friends to me and my family, like really beloved, dear friends to my wife Nomi, to our daughters. And that has been just one of the most enriching experiences of my life at UCLA. So you know that, but I want to acknowledge it in public. So thank you. There's so many friends here, from Ben in the back to my LA brothers, Victor and Tom, and my colleagues, Teo and Ron and Soraya. I mean, it feels like it's home. I guess I'll try and answer your question now, because I've taken 5 minutes.
Well, I mean, so this is a conversation that we often find ourselves in, which is that what is the utility for history? And you know, there are a lot of people that think that history should be done for history's sake. And then there are those of us who feel like it can actually be a lens or a guide for us to understand our world. So I don't know if you talk about that.
I'd love to reflect on that, because indeed there is a venerable tradition which holds that history is really only for history's sake. It's the pleasure and thrill and vocation of entering into an archive and discovering documents that have not been seen for years or centuries, holding them in your hands. The tactile sensation is itself its own great thrill, and then simply telling the story for its own sake. And, you know, I have many colleagues for whom that is the end of history, and it's, I think, a very admirable pursuit to believe that that work of discovery, of rediscovery and reenactment, as the historian and philosopher Collingwood would call it, takes place. But there's another tradition, and it's not a modern tradition, it's actually an ancient tradition, which asserts that there is a utility or benefit to the study of history. And it extends back into both Hellenistic and Hebraic antiquity. Ron Malor is here so he could give us a long disquisition on Taciturn, amongst others. But I think in this context of the first century BC statesman and thinker Cicero, who's famously articulated the ideal of historia magistra vitae, history as a guide to life. And indeed, fellow historians and thinkers in this Hellenistic tradition understood that understanding the past was the essential precondition to the formation of one destined for a life of public service. That you could not possibly understand how to attempt to repair the world without that understanding of how the past had unfolded. And in that regard, the past was not just the prerequisite, it was not just that which preceded the present, but it was the essential precondition to understanding how we got where we are. This is a tradition that continued certainly into the Middle Ages. I think here of the great Islamic historian, 14th century Ibn Khaldun, for whom history was the key to understanding, as he said, the essence of human social life. So if you were interested in improving social conditions, according to Ibn Khaldun, you needed to understand the past. And this tradition indeed continues into the modern era, and that's somewhat counterintuitive because it's in the modern era that we have this idea of history as a science, as a critical, dispassionate science that should be undertaken simply for its own sake. And yet there's a countervailing tradition, one with which I associate deeply, as do you, Justin, I think, which is expressed repeatedly. And I want to just mention a few of the exemplars of this tradition. For me, one of the most important is actually an erstwhile historian and linguist, but better known to us as a philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who in 1873 wrote a short essay called On the Utility and Disadvantages of History. And what he said famously in that essay is that we are kind of snowed under. Think of this anticipation. Living in a world as he was without social media, we are snowed under by a surfeit of historical data. The job of the historian is to understand what is truly significant, monumental, and to use that as a key for educating for life. History, he said, has no meaning unless it serves to educate for life. And I just want to conclude with maybe two thoughts. That tradition continues into the 20th century and really alters the face of history as we know it. When we have a new cadre of social historians in the latter half of the 20th century. We have historians of the Native American experience, of women's experience, of the Black experience, of gay and lesbian experience, that are now added to our narrative account of the past. Stories that were either forgotten or excluded now become part and parcel of a widened, polychromatic view of history. And the ambition and motivation of the historians who engage in this work, from the great John Hope Franklin to Gerda Lerner to George Chauncey, the motivation is not just to widen the historical narrative, but to allow for a society that was inclusive and pluralistic and valued difference.
Yeah. And I think on that note, I mean, one of the discussions we've had before is how much of history is predictive in that way of trying to find analogies and threads, and what are the limitations to that? Can it lead us astray? But then to add another component to that, I sometimes wonder, is it also the skill sets that historians use, that they cultivate, that these are the sort of lenses. It's not necessarily about saying, oh, this is going to repeat itself in the same way, but really about the critical analysis that's required, the same sorts of tools that historians used in order to sift through, as you said, that all of that monumental amount of information. I don't know what your take is on that.
Yeah, well, I just want to say that, although it would seem, just talking about historians of the Black experience and the Native American experience, it would seem, and I think it's fair to say, that there was a political objective underlying their work. And that's okay, because you can bring to the study of history, and in fact, you can't but bring to the study of history your own experience. Your experience frames the lens of observation. From that point forward, however, you're called upon to sift evidence according to the norms of the profession, not to distort it, not to magnify it, not to amplify it, but to get it as you understand it to be, as the great 19th century historian Ranke said, as it actually happened. I mean, we all have some measure of skepticism about that impulse, but nonetheless try to do it. What that involves is what I think is the core skill of the historian that is especially important in the age of polycrisis. It's what I call contextual reasoning. It's that ability to understand that any single historical moment is marked by the juncture of an almost endless number of vectors, of historical vectors. Our job as historians is to try to unpack that point of convergence, to understand where those vectors come from, to understand what the etiology or provenance of those vectors were, and in so doing, to sort of understand how problems arise. Contextual reasoning is, for me, the essential key to problem solving, because it allows us to understand how a problem took rise and kind of compels us to unpack it such that we can know what to avoid next time around, or even how to repair it.
Right. And I think, there's something in what you said about recognizing that that we are always seeing things through our own lens, and we are tapping into personal experiences. It's something we try to do a lot here at the Wende, which is try to say, no matter where we are in the world, whatever the exhibitions are geopolitically, where the collections are from, we try to find those human themes, right? The ones that everybody it resonates with. So, for example, the Berlin Wall, a lot of people can identify with what it means to be divided from a family, about borders around the world. So these are human themes. But I guess to get back to a point that you make, because I think it's an interesting one, is this idea of while recognizing that people's own perspectives are seen through this lens, I suppose one of the important things is being a informed citizen is recognizing those things. Like, what are people trying to say and to get at? And the thing that I keep thinking about is, we do workshops here with teachers, K through 12, but mostly 9th, 10th grade, which is when they deal with this subject. And the teachers will always say to me, which I think is interesting, at the beginning of the workshops, I say, what do you need from us? What is it that you're missing? And what it's not is, well, I wish they would know more about names, dates, and places, although that's always a part of it. But it's really about the challenges of sifting through all this information that they might get from social media, wherever it is, and recognizing a few things. First of all, who's saying what, for what reasons, because they are seeing it through their particular lens, and then checking your sources. That is that's in our historian's toolbox, right? Like, I think that's something that we can teach beyond the, this, if you treat your allies badly, this can happen. Well, I mean, we should know that too. We should learn from that. But just in terms of of understanding what is being said, for what reason.
Yeah. Well, right. So, we are called upon to adhere to the norms of the profession that have been established about how to read evidence. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that those lenses that we bring to study the past vary radically, and that's okay. Some might say, well, your lens distorts the past. And I might say, your lens is additive. It may liberate us from a perspective that really, in some sense, prevented us from seeing the whole. And this, I think, is what's so compelling and important about history. It can be a force of preservation. It can be a force of corrective or revision. It can be, with a long enough trail of time, even predictive. This is, in some measure, if we have a massive big data, whether it be over climate or income inequality, as the French scholar Thomas Piketty has famously offered up, we can not only survey the past, but we can offer very concrete suggestions about how we might get out of some of the problems that we find ourselves in. And so I'm thinking here of a document produced in 2014 by two historians called the History Manifesto. Joe Gouldy and David Armitage produced this manifesto in which they lamented the fact that history had succumbed to the plague of short-termism. I'm going to write a dissertation on 2 weeks in the life of a favorite historical figure of mine. And they said, they kind of misread the field, but the general point was an important one, which is tend to or try to reach long-termism, long-term perspectives. And it's through that long-term perspective that I think we can really maximize the potential of history to tell us how we got where we are and how we might chart a better future. Having said all that, I do want to just, if I can, turn things back to you and sort of get at the origin story of this remarkable place. You're a young guy traveling around East Germany, like coming across, objects that, are strewn about the streets after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you say, gee, we should collect these things.
Well, when you say it like that, David.
What were you thinking? And how do we get from that point, from getting a fragment of the Berlin Wall to the Wende Museum?
Well, I think it's totally in line with what you just spoke about, because, it sounds so obvious, and it is, but sometimes we have to connect the dots in the way to say that everything that we've experienced before directly relates to here and now. That by definition, what we are going through is the culmination of all of this history and past that led to this. And that was a starting place for me, because what it meant was that the ways in which history was being created, was being interpreted was not just in some government archive somewhere, which is what all grad students are sort of sent to do, but it's in people's basements, in their attics, in their minds, in their heads, the stories they tell. And, we've talked about this too before. What is the role of the historian? And, I'm saying this for somebody that did his PhD on East German symbols and icons, so not a beach read, but, I think that we have to, our job is to make it relatable and accessible to some. There has to be some sort of message, and shame on us if we are not trying to do that. I was always interested in how cultural histories can be interrogated, can be sort of engaged with through objects, through artwork, and to me, it's not only about the things themselves. It's that they're a catalyst. I mean, every day I'm here at the museum and somebody will see something, and maybe sometimes it's completely new, and therefore it's, oh my God, what's this? There's a kind of a surprise or curiosity, or sometimes they have a story about it. They remember that somebody that they played with this toy as a kid. And to me, like, those are all the connective pieces. Those are all the connective tissue. And I mean, not a big surprise here, but a lot of the Cold War themes are here with us right now. I mean, we talked about surveillance, right? But there's resistance, there's organization, there is interrogation, there's emigration, there's immigration, there's propaganda. I mean, there's all kinds of themes that we can then dive back and find the artifact or the story to tell. And at the end of the day, I love it. Historians are part of a grand tradition from the beginning of time. We're storytellers. That's how we learn things, is from our elders, the people that came before us. Now, it's more of a scientific field, and we like our footnotes and citations for all the right reasons, but we should never lose track of what that essence is or what that story is. So to me, that was always what the museum was really about.
Yeah, I just want to say one other thing to build on your beautiful reminder of the importance of storytelling, about the function of the historian, and particularly at this moment as we've described it as a moment of polycrisis. I'm always remembering the famous assertion of the French historian Pierre Nora that the modern age is marked by sort of the unrestrained acceleration of time.
Yeah.
Things just move at a quicker pace.
Yeah.
And part of what the call of the historian is to slow down, is to sort of try and render the evolution of history in kind of slow motion, to try to take time to really engage in that kind of contextual reasoning and understand not just this sort of completely chaotic and inexplicable convergence of seemingly haphazard developments or events, but to really slow it down, slow down time, and really pay attention and identify the strains that make up the fabric of a particular moment, and really focusing on a moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was Ranke who said every epoch in history is immediate to God. So every moment has its own kind of integrity to it. And that's part of what the historian is called upon to do, is really to unpack that moment through slow, methodical work. And it seems to me all the more important in this moment of polycrisis to understand, there are multiple and significant vectors clashing with one another, each of which requires its own understanding in order to understand the larger cloud of chaos.
Yeah, and that, to me, this is a great segue into some meaty stuff, because history right now, and we were on our way in today. We saw all these collections that are just coming in now because there's so much, because of the war, because of anti-Semitism in different parts of the world. whatever the issues are, the things are at risk, right? Because the things have meaning to them. They're ascribed meaning. And history is often weaponized or instrumentalized in order to achieve political ends. And it has a direct impact on what survives and what does not. How can history be used as a bulwark against this, or even as a way to resist, or after the conflicts, how can it be used for reconciliation?
Yeah. Well, I just want to highlight that history indeed can and often is used as a tool of distortion, a tool of self-aggrandizement, a tool of occlusion from memory or vision of important parts of the historical story for overtly political reasons and nefarious ones. There's a lot of bad rewriting of history. The sober-minded history that we've talked about, which comes from a place, one has a subject position, as we say in the academy, assuming it adheres to the evidentiary rules of the game, can really break through that distortion. What I'm about to talk about is, as much aspirational as actual, but I think a lot about this, the distortions of history in the context of a historical site that I spend a lot of time thinking about, which is Israel-Palestine. I think of the potential of history to do two things that I think bespeak its real value. One is to kind of pierce through the towering historical, cultural, and psychological walls that prevent one side from seeing the other. And oftentimes those walls are built upon historical narratives that capture a certain truth, but also occlude from vision another truth. And I've worked closely with historians, Israelis and Palestinians, Sami Adwan and Dan Baron, Dan Bartal, Eyal Naveh, who have tried to produce joint histories of the relationship between Jews and Palestinians, Zionists and Palestinian nationalists, Israelis and Palestinians, in ways that kind of jar the existing very monochromatic historical accounts that either side produces into a new recognition. It's no surprise that the ministries of education, both Israel and Palestine, refuse to introduce into their schools the side-by-side textbook that Sami and his team have produced. But that is a direction toward which we must head because it allows for history permits a rehumanizing of the historical other in ways that I think is really a key condition of achieving any degree of peaceful resolution. I'll just say one other thing that I think history does, especially at a moment of political stasis such as we were in there and elsewhere, and that is that history inspires the imagination, and particularly the political imagination. So much of the political discourse in and about Israel-Palestine is sort of caught between one state versus two states. Turns out there's a pretty wide spectrum in between one and two. Federations, confederations, canton systems, all ideas that have been consigned to the dustbin of history, that it might behoove us to recover from that dustbin in the terms that one of our great inspirations, Walter Benjamin, would encourage us to do. Retrieve from the dustbin of history that which has been forgotten. History can inspire political imagination. It's not the only way, it's not the only tool, but it's an important one. And I think we have seen some of the potential of history to play that constructive role, overcoming distortion in other situations that we can define as post-conflict, which is not Israel-Palestine. The Balkans, post-war Poland, Northern Ireland, all have experimented and had some rather successful experiments with history as a tool of reconciliation.
Well, turning to Ukraine, speaking of thinking about what future reconciliation looks like, so much of what you're describing is going on right now in the battles between where two sides have used history or the combat through culture, because it is totally intertwined with one's own identity, and the ways in which, the historians, the history world and conflict come together or clash. You can see in the war zones where Russian soldiers are going to archives and destroying them if they are the local Ukrainian newspaper or something like that, where because embedded in there is the whole history of a particular community in a place. And while, of course, right now you don't want, we would never say that, saving those things is as important as the lives that are being affected. That is part of what you are speaking about in reconciliation, how history can be that when, and it's harder to do it if it's gone. Yeah. You can't write about, you can't think about, you can't use things when they don't exist.
Right. There's certainly that. And I mean, it's so grievously wounding to think of archives and valuable cultural property destroyed. And I should just say, in a local sense, it's so grievously unfortunate that we have lost so much valuable cultural property in the wildfires in both Pacific Palisades and Altadena. But history plays such a prominent role in Ukraine, Russia. I mean, I think of Putin's massive historical tome based on that rewriting of history that served as, in some sense, a roadmap to the war that he began. I also think of history in that context, in the Russian-Ukrainian context, in another way, as perhaps the ultimate source of hope. And that is, history reminds us of the radical contingency of the past, the radical contingency of history itself, meaning the one ironclad rule of history is its utter is the constancy of change and its utter unpredictability. And I think of this in the context of Ukraine. I mean, who would have thought that 75, 80 years after the Second World War, we would be lauding Ukraine as a beacon of democracy? I mean, that's almost unimaginable, certainly to any student of Jewish history, not to mention of European history. And again, therein lies a source, a constant veiled source of hope that we can never fully predict. Even if we try and maximize the predictive powers of history, we can never fully overcome that radical contingency. So there are many ways in which history can be of benefit to us. I think you're absolutely right that the goal in the first instance is one of preservation of sources. And perhaps in the second instance is countering distortion through a constant process of revision and corrective. And that kind of, that cycle of history is really, is what lends the profession its vitality, that constant drive to rewrite, retell, reimagine the past, offering new perspectives that don't necessarily negate previous ones, but are additive in this constant and ultimately endless quest to arrive at what early 20th century historians thought of as the total history.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah. And it's in thinking about how, the history of the present in a certain sense. I mean, we have that sense. I've heard that a lot lately that, people have this feeling of that history is being created right now. What are we going to do about it? And actually how sometimes through the act of collecting, we are collecting stories that we can then turn to as anchors, as reference points, as the way to combat the destruction, either willful or, as you talked about in the recent fires. I'm thinking, and I want to get to in a minute here, because that's my soft lob to talk about the LA History Collaborative. how historians can come together to help protect, to support civil society when there are threats to it, how we can play a role in being in the defense of these institutions that underpin our democracy. You can look at Putin, for example, and look at the ways in which civil society has been quashed there, and it's a sort of a precursor, a precondition to authoritarian rule. I wonder if you have some historian's perspective, both on the sort of that act of collecting as a way to help support civil.
Yeah.
Society.
Well, I have a few thoughts about this. I'll get to the collecting in a minute, but what I'm often reminded of in thinking of today, and you asked earlier about analogy, and we didn't really have a chance to talk about it, but in thinking of the world today, especially the United States, I'm always reminded in this context of the work of the Yale political scientist Juan Linz, who established a kind of what he thought of as litmus test for testing the fragility of a democratic tradition. He spent a lot of time thinking about Europe in the 1930s, and he established a set of criteria by which one can and should measure the strength of a democratic tradition, which included your attitude towards your political opponents. Like, do you threaten to imprison them or to prosecute them? Do you value the free press? Do you agree to play by the rules of the democratic game? And I would just suggest that Linz's litmus test is one that we really have an obligation, a moral obligation, to introduce and think about quite seriously. But I want to turn our attention back to the local, because it may well be that in moments such as this, where we can make the greatest difference, especially when we have people like Isaac leading us, is at the local level. Like, that may be our salvation. The revolution will begin from the bottom up at the local level, which is where we can make a difference in a palpable way. And here, I just want to recall two experiments at the local level that are very dear to me. The first is the vision which really Meyer and Rini gave us 20 years ago. I mean, I first heard about it in your backyard, Ron, at one of your legendary parties, when we were all, Theo and you and I and Meyer and Rini were talking about this idea of creating something at UCLA that would use history to help leaven policy based on the proposition or the question, would policymakers do a better or worse job if they had a richer sense of historical perspective? The answer seems quite obvious. And out of that idea, that pretty intuitive idea, developed 8 years ago something called the Luskin Center for History and Policy, whose mission is to bring historical perspective to bear on critical issues of the day in order to inform policy. And we've sort of done deep dives into the history of homelessness, the history of rent control, the history of the effort to bring the Olympics to Los Angeles, the effort of the history of our university in crisis, the history of neighborhood development in Los Angeles. And these reports, which you can find at our website, Luskin Center for History and Policy, have gotten into the hands of policymakers. In one instance, they got into the hands of a federal district judge who ordered the city of Los Angeles to set aside $1 billion additional dollars for the unhoused population of Los Angeles, quoting our report like 40 times, but who's counting? Unfortunately, that ruling was set aside by an appellate judge. But nonetheless, this is the kind of impact we want to have, where we deploy history as precursors did, like Richard Neustadt and Ernest May at Harvard, when they had a course intended for policymakers in which they sat and studied case studies from the past. That's the kind of impact we want to have. And growing out of that idea, I want to just mention one final thing that you know about, in fact, have been part of. In the wake of the ravages of the LA wildfires, we, the Luskin Center for History and Policy, convened a group of leaders of cultural institutions and historians from around the city to come together to think about what we could do to collect, preserve, and ultimately disseminate stories, and for that matter, cultural property that have been endangered by the fires. Stories and property of individuals as well as communities. And what we have seen in the 3 meetings that we've had so far as part of the LA History Collaborative is a sense of tremendous goodwill, but also the potential of history to, in a certain sense, create a new foundation upon which the next chapter of the history of those communities can be built and written. And it has been enormously inspiring to be part of that. I mentioned this to, I think it was Caleb, when you were last at B'nai David, Isaac, and we want to talk further with you about it. But we see, I guess, both the spirit of collaboration in the wake of crisis and the potential of history to play a reparative role as absolutely key to what we need to do in the world. And I think our challenge is to begin at the local level and then scale up to the next set of levels.
Well, that gets me right to the last part of our chat here, which is where do we go from here? And what you've just said is such a good example of that. First of all, what we're doing here and the fact that all of you came to hear this today gives me great hope. And also in partnerships, these collaboratives that bring people together. So we're not out there on our own doing it. We're doing it shoulder to shoulder in conjunction with one another. And it gets me, to sort of end where we started. Isaac mentioned something that we talk a lot about, and we do as well, which is how do you take the knowledge that's generated in the university and share it and broadcast it and bring it out into the community? And, this is a great example of that, because here we are with our UCLA friends, professors, people that are experts in their field, trying to help us make sense of this world that we live in. I
have a more specific idea.
Yeah.
Just coming out of building upon what you said. We're coming up to Sacramento, Isaac, on a monthly basis to give you and your colleagues an historical briefing to understand how we got where we are. Certainly, we'll do that with the delegation from Southern California, but I suspect that all of your colleagues from throughout the state could benefit from that, and I'd like to just put that on the table. It's an idea that has been floated at various points in time. We'd love to engage in that kind of briefing so that you and your colleagues can be even better informed about history when you go about making your decisions, which affect the state.
I can't add anything to that. It's a perfect place to end right there. Thank you, Isaac, Luskins, David Myers. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you for listening to Then and Now, a podcast by the UCLA Luskin Center for History and Policy. You can learn more about our work or share your thoughts with us at our website, luskincenter.history.ucla.edu. Our show is produced by David Myers and Rosalind Campbell, with original music by Daniel Reichman. Special thanks to the UCLA History Department for its support, and thanks to you for listening.